Started a new series a couple weeks ago called Influencers. Everybody say Influencers. I hope that you enjoyed it. We're going to continue in it for the next few weeks. And in the series, we're looking at kind of a variety of stories from the Bible and looking at this idea of influence. Like, what is it that influences us and how do we influence the people around us? I feel like God has called each of us as an ambassador of Christ to influence people, to compel and convince them of truth, to compel and convince them of the gospel, to influence people for Christ. I think if you're a Christian in this room, it's not an optional thing. God has called you to do that. In the Great Commission, He commands us to go out, to tell people about Him, to teach them, to do just as Jesus did to His disciples, and that was influence. And so we're going to look at that. We're looking at it through a few different kind of ways. And last week, we tackled this question, all right? What is it that influences us, all right? Hopefully, you got a better idea of what are the things that influence you. If this is your first week here, that's okay. We're going to kind of go back over some of those things. But we use this example that when you see somebody who is drunk, it's easy to look at them and say, hey, that person is under the influence of alcohol. It's easy for us to see that. I told you guys I grew up with an alcoholic stepdad. It was easy to know when I got home from school if my stepdad was drunk or not. It was just very obvious. But when we sin, or when we do something wrong, or when we act out in rage, when we do something that we're like, that was really dumb, it's harder for us to pinpoint what it is that we are under the influence of. Do you get that? Do you kind of see that contrast? And so what I want us to do before we get into the part about how God has called us to be an influence outward, we have to figure out and we have to kind of curb and we have to kind of guard what is it that influences us. So we're going to look at this again tonight. The same question. Hopefully we continue to get some clarity on what it is that influences us. All right? Because remember, if we figure out what it is that influences us, we can then determine better how we influence other people. When I think about this idea, I've told you guys, this excites me. I heard a story about how that God spoke to someone using the talk from last week. I love this idea of influence. I think it's sprinkled all throughout our lives. Maybe you can think back to a period of your life where you say, man, that was a really influential time in my life. Maybe it's something that's really good. Maybe you look back and you think, man, that was an influential time or moment in my life, and it was really bad. One of the things I talked with Alex about when I was thinking through this series is I was telling him when I was 11 or 12 years old, I went over to one of my friend's house. His name was TJ. Everybody say, hey, TJ. TJ wasn't a good influence to me. And TJ, yeah, sorry. TJ took me into his dad's bedroom and found his dad's stash of porno mags. All right. I was 11 years old. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And I remember just how TJ influenced me in that way and how it started this decade of struggle with those types of things. And the reality is that people influence us all the time. The things that we see, that we listen to, that we hear, they all influence us, and we have some moments in our life that we can look back and say, man, that was more influential or less influential. But the reality is at all times, in all places, under every circumstance, in some way, you are being influenced. And so tonight, I want us to continue diving into that question. What is it that influences us? Who or what in life is my primary influence? Is the thing that influences me the most? And I want us to look through that question tonight through the lens of Judas, all right? Does anybody remember who Judas was? Who was Judas? Give me, who was Judas? You just yell it out. Yeah, he betrayed Jesus. Before he betrayed Jesus, he was what? A disciple of Jesus, all right? Kind of the one of the 12, the guy, right? He was one of Jesus' disciples, one of the main disciples that Jesus had. He lived with Jesus, walked around with Jesus, was in ministry with Jesus while he was here on earth, literally learned from the greatest guy, undoubtedly, to ever walk the earth, Jesus. Judas was there with him. Jesus taught Judas. Jesus was there influencing Judas. At some point, I'm going to mix those names up, and you're just going to have to forgive me, okay? Because they're really close together. Judas was there. He lived with Jesus. We love to talk about Jesus, and we love to read about what Jesus did and the things that Jesus taught. Judas was literally there under the teaching of Jesus. We get to read about miracles. Judas watched the miracles happen. That is the realm that Judas was living in. And so what I want to do is look through the idea of influence when we talk about Judas, because we talked about how, I'm out of order here. We talked about how Judas ended up betraying Jesus. Let's look at what leads up to that point of Judas being under the teaching of the Savior of the world, his Creator, how he betrays him. So Jesus had a ton of ministry, a ton of things that Jesus did. In fact, when you think of Jesus, what do you think of? Give me some stuff. You know, so when I say Jesus Christ, what do you think of? God, love, all right? When you think of his ministry on earth, miracle worker, way maker, promise keeper, yeah. What else do you think of when you think of Jesus? Give me some stories. What about some stories you've heard of Jesus? Yeah, he healed a blind man. Water into wine. That was his first miracle. What was the one in the back? Feeding the 5,000. Raising people from the dead. Judas saw that. He was with Jesus for most of that, right? We get to talk about it. We love learning about it. Judas was there in Jesus' midst as these things happen. And while we love to hear about Jesus and we like the things that Jesus did, not everybody liked what Jesus was doing during his ministry on earth. Not everybody was a fan. And so what we see is that Jesus, as he kind of makes his way into Jerusalem, he gets into the center, kind of the epicenter of like the religious system of the day, Judaism. He gets into where like all of like the hierarchy of religious leaders are. And as Jesus is there and he's teaching in the temple and he's doing things, he's doing miracles, he's causing a little bit of a ruckus. He's causing things to be a little disturbed because the religious leaders didn't like how radical Jesus' teachings were about loving the non-Jews, about how Jesus could really turn the religious system upside down and flop it. And the religious leaders were nervous about that, and they didn't like it. Let's look at what they were saying here in Matthew 26. It says, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he did a long period of teaching. He said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days, the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man, that's another name for Jesus, will be delivered up to be crucified. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him, all right? So the high priest and the other elders that were there, they determined, hey, this Jesus guy is making us nervous, and we need to take him out. But he's already caused enough problems. Let's not do it in broad daylight. Let's take him out stealthily, all right? Let's get rid of him kind of under the radar. Passover it was a big religious kind of festival, and they didn't want to cause any more controversy than had already happened. So they're going to try and stealthily remove Jesus. And while that plot is kind of thickening to catch Jesus and kill him, Jesus continues doing ministry. He continues doing the stuff that he'd always done. He knows he's getting close to the end, but he continues in ministry. Look what verse 5 says. It says, now when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. And when the disciples saw it, they were indignant. What's indignant mean? Yeah, they were upset, saying, why this waste? For this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me. For you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. So Jesus had just said, in 2 days after Passover, the Son of Man will be crucified. And now he's saying, for you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. Jesus, in this moment, while the disciples are bickering and fussing about what had just happened, Jesus is trying to teach them. Jesus, through his whole ministry, from the very first disciples that he called on the shores of Galilee, he was always trying to influence them, to teach them, to mold them and shape them in who Jesus was aiming at, and who God had called them to be, the disciples who would ultimately change the course of history. That is what Jesus was doing. And even here, while the disciples are bickering about how much money Jesus just dropped, or this woman just dropped on this huge thing of perfume, Jesus is trying to teach them something. And so we see this picture. Jesus is about to die. There's a plot to kill him. And we see that Jesus is continuing. It's kind of a ritual for them that when someone would die, they would put tons of spices and beautiful smelling things on them, because I don't know if you guys have ever seen like a dead animal on the side of the road that's been there for a week, but it doesn't smell very good. And Jesus, if he was going to be dead, laying in a tomb for a long period of time, eventually he would not smell very good. And so it actually talks about how like this is in a way preparing Jesus for burial, preparing him for the cross by giving him this smell of the perfume. Now we see that in this account of the story, which I think is a really good account in Matthew 26. It says that the disciples saw it and they were indignant. But if you look at one of the other Gospels in John chapter 12, it gives us a little more insight into it. It says, but Judas Iscariot. Now this is literally the same story recorded from a different perspective. It says, but Judas, this is the Judas we're talking about tonight, one of his disciples who was about to betray him, as Henry announced to us earlier, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? That's almost a year's worth of wages. How much do you guys think is like a year's worth of wages for like a working man? $50K, all right, so that's like $50,000, all right, and given to the poor. He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because Judas was a what? A thief, having charge of the money bag he used to help himself to what was put into it. If you guys were at Youth Winter Conference this year, Pastor Joe taught us on a very similar passage. He connected the two. And I remember when he shared this to me, I just thought about how the realm of influence compared from Judas to the other disciples. All right? Here's the point. Judas was under the teaching and the influence of Jesus, but he did not allow it to change his life. He was there. He saw the miracles. He witnessed the miracles. He was probably there when Lazarus was raised from the dead under the name of Jesus. And he did not allow the influence that Jesus was trying so hard to pour on his disciples. He didn't allow it to change his life. Ultimately, in the end, Judas regrets his decision, but he did not allow what Jesus was teaching and was showing and consistently influencing his disciples. He didn't allow it to change his life. And I think that we do that as well. He allowed money to be the primary influence in his life rather than God. And we do the same thing. It's so easy to point at Judas and say, Judas, you scumbag, why would you take money over Jesus? That's crazy. But we do the same thing. On your card, I think there's a line that says, I would rather blank influence me than God. Now, if you are able to write something in there, like you know it, that's wild, right? Because I don't even know that I would have the guts, the courage to write down what is truly influencing me more than God. But the reality is, just as Judas chose money more than the influence of Jesus, he allowed money to influence him, we all have something in our life, most likely, that we're saying, you know what, this is influencing me more than God. So, Judas is eventually going to betray Jesus. Let's look at what it says in Matthew 26. I think I might have skipped around. Sorry about that, Evan. It says, then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, this is a few more verses later, went to the chief priests and said, what will you give me if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought out an opportunity to betray him. All right? A few verses pass by. Jesus and the disciples, they go up to this garden called Gethsemane. All right? If you have we talk about that story a lot where Jesus sweat drops of blood and the disciples are over there and Jesus is praying and the disciples are supposed to be praying, but what are they doing? They're snoozing, all right? They're asleep. And Jesus goes and wakes them up and then immediately goes here. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with a great crowd of swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. It's literally the religious leaders coming after Jesus right now. Now the betrayer had given them a sign. Judas said, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," which means teacher. And he kissed him. He literally says, "Greetings, influencer. Greetings, Rabbi. Greetings, teacher." And then betrays him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." And they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. Judas was under the influence and the teaching of Jesus, but he did not allow it to shape his decisions. He did not allow it to cause him into a series of actions. Instead, he said, "You know what? Money is more important to me right now than Jesus." Now, I don't know that many of us in the room would say that money is the primary influence for us, but it might be. It might be some other things, and we're going to talk about it more in just a little bit. When I was in college, I was looking at, I thought that maybe I would work at a church, all right? Did any of you here think that maybe you work at a church one day? None of you. All right, a couple, okay. Yeah, I thought maybe I would work at a church. I didn't really know what the heck I was doing, and I was like, maybe I'll work at a church. And so there was a local church that had just been planted in our community, and they were looking for anybody willing to help. And so I went, and I started helping. I was leading worship. I was teaching a class there, and I enjoyed it. It was fun, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And then one summer day, and it was in August, I met a guy named Sean. I'm going to show you a picture of Sean and his family. Sean is really special to me. Sean looked at me as a college kid who had no idea what the heck I was going to do with my life. And he said, "Hey, will you come work for me? I really need somebody to help me in my youth ministry." And so I was like, "Well, how much does it pay?" And he said, "It will be, this much money." And I was like, "I'm a broke college student. I'm already working a ridiculous amount of time here, but I could always make some more money." And so I was like, "Sure, I'll take the job." And so I started working with Sean. And I worked with him for about a year, kind of helping him in his youth ministry. And I would help, lead games. He helped me lead a couple events. I would teach from time to time. And Sean honestly taught me a lot about what I know about ministry. I would say he mentored me. We still have a pretty good relationship. I actually have a reminder on my phone every Sunday to pray for him. He's a pastor at a church in the Promised Land, God's country, South Carolina. And so Sean and I really look up to him. But Sean taught me a couple really important things. The first one is that Sean taught me that ministry is really important. You might come here on a Sunday night. This might be your first night. It might be your 50th night. And you're just like, "Bro, I'm just here to hang out. I'm here to play spike ball. I'm here to slam it on the ping pong table and to grab some coffee at the coffee bar." And that's totally cool. I actually am really glad that you're here. I love hanging out with you guys. But what we do here, learning about God, worshiping God, is far more important than me slaughtering you at spike ball, okay? I actually lost tonight. I'll have to take the L, okay? Yeah. It's far more important than that. Sean taught me that ministry is really, really important. The other thing that Sean taught me is that he helped me distinguish God's call to ministry on my life. He knew that God had gifted me in certain ways, and he crafted those gifts in me so that one day I would be able to leave out from under his teaching and go and be able to go and pastor at a church. And that's exactly what happened, all right? Now listen, when I was working for Sean, I could have ignored anything he said to me. He always gave me advice and tried to pour wisdom into me, and I could have been like, "Thanks, but no thanks." Sean could have tried to craft those gifts into me, and I would be like, "Bro, thanks, but I'm really just doing this for the money. I kind of needed a paycheck. I appreciate, the offer to help invest in me." But I didn't. And that's what we look at when we see Judas's life. He had someone like Jesus, this positive, good influence in his life, and instead, he chose a different route. He chose to betray Jesus, to let money be his primary influence. But he didn't have to do that. Obviously, there is prophecy being fulfilled here, but ultimately, Judas is the one who chooses to betray Jesus. So listen, our life is full of a ton of negative influences all around us. The people we hang out with, the movies that we can watch, the Netflix series that we're currently binging, our social media, the podcasts we listen to, our friends, our sports teams. They can all be negative influences in our life, but they don't have to be. Do you get that? I'm not telling you to go live in a basement with nothing else around you so that you have no negative influences. And what I want you to try and figure out is how can you use things that would normally be negative influences and redeem those things. Let those things be positive influences in your life. Let's talk about social media for a second. I love social media. One of the things that I've had to figure out and guard myself with on social media is that I have to turn my notifications off. If I don't turn my notifications off, I will spend a ridiculous amount of time on social media. Is anybody right there with me? Ton of time on social media. Has anybody done the notification kick? No notifications on your phone? I actually run my phone 90% of the time in do not disturb. So even if you call me, I won't even know that you called me. You can text me. It might take me an hour or two to get back to you because I don't want it to notify me of anything. I don't want to be attached to it. I know that by nature, I am addicted to this little tiny screen right here. I know that I am. Look, I got a text message already. I know that I'm addicted to it. And I have to set up those guardrails. We talked about that last week. We have to guard ourselves on what we allow to influence us. But social media doesn't have to be a negative influence. One of the reasons that I really got excited about this series was actually something that I read on social media or that I heard or saw, whatever, on social media. There's a guy that I follow. I actually don't even know his name, but he works at a church called Long Hollow. Has anybody ever heard of Long Hollow Church? I'd actually never heard of it. I still don't even know where it is or anything. It's probably like Texas with the name Long Hollow. Yeah? No? All right. It's Long Hollow. And he said this thing. I was just scrolling through Reels one day, and he said this. He said, when I sin, I don't worry about what God will do to me. I worry about what God won't do through me. And I was like, man, that's crazy. God is not sitting there with a lightning bolt ready to strike me dead when I sin. If he did, I would be dead a long time ago. But I am scared that when I live in a life of bad choices and dumb decisions and sin, that there might be a moment where God says, I want the gospel to be shared there, and I'm going to be hands up not willing because my heart is not in the right place, and God won't use me to influence people. And that is just a quick example of how social media impacted me in a good, beneficial way. Now listen, as you scroll through your feed, if it's nothing but negative things and inappropriate memes, that rhymed, I actually kept going with it, but I'm not a freestyler. If it's just full of things that are unencouraging and bad influences, yeah, social media is going to be bad for you. But if your feed is filled with good theology and teachers from different churches and people on your friends list who are trying to encourage or sharing Bible verses. Social media does not have to be a negative influence, but it likely is a negative influence in your life. What about the things that we watch, like movies or Netflix or Hulu? What else you got streaming these days? Disney Plus, ESPN Plus? What else? I don't know. I'm just a Netflix guy, all right? Whatever. The things that we watch don't have to be negative influences in our life. It's crazy, but you can actually choose to watch things that are actually kind of good for you. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Have you ever started a series, you're like, I don't know what this series is all about, and you started watching it, and halfway through the first episode, there's a sex scene, all right? And in that moment, you have the option, I want to keep watching this, or, yeah, we're going to try something different. You have that option. What you watch doesn't have to be a negative influence in your life. It can be good. Alex, if you want to talk about movies and how to look at movies with a critical mind, that guy back there is your guy, all right? He will tell you movies that you can watch and how you can look for God images in movies and how you can think through things critically. What you watch doesn't have to be negative, but it probably is. It takes work to make sure that the things that we fill our mind with are not negative. What about your friends? Oftentimes when we think about the ideas of negative influences, we probably have a couple people in mind that pop up and we say, you know what? That person they are a bad influence on my life. They make me think bad thoughts. They make me want to do things that I know that I shouldn't do. They make me cuss or whatever you want to throw out there, all right? We automatically think that our friends are bad influences on our life, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can have a group of friends. I was just talking to somebody about this literally an hour ago, that some of the best moments that I had in all of high school was with these 3 dudes that came to me at probably the worst part of high school for me, and they surrounded me with the Bible. They surrounded me with prayer and encouragement. They were there for me. Like when things got really bad, they were there for me to hold me on my back, to pray for me, to help me through it. All right? Your friends can actually be a really good influence in your life, but you have to have the right friends. You have to intentionally surround yourself with people who are going to push you towards a lifestyle of holiness, that are going to push you to do things that Christ has called you to do. It's just the way that it is. And I'm not saying to exclude yourself from every bad influence in your life. Those people need you to be a good influence to them. But remember, before we can figure out how we are going to be a good influence and influence people for Christ, we first have to realize what it is that is influencing us, surrounding ourselves with good friends. What about sports? I know a lot of you play on a sports team. You do sports. It's an all-consuming thing for a lot of people these days. Your sports team does not have to be a negative influence in your life. It doesn't. You can use sports in an extremely beneficial way. I am spitting all so you guys might want to back up from the spit zone up here, all right? Sports can teach you great levels of discipline, can teach you amazing levels of teamwork. Sports can be very beneficial in your life. But when things like your track meet are more important to you than your quiet time, you've got a problem. When the thing that you stay up late at night thinking about how can I perfect my jump shot, instead of thinking and resting in the fact that, man, God has loved me and is faithful to me despite my imperfections, then you've got a problem. Your sports and your idolatry of it and your all-consuming mind and time and energy of sports can be a negative thing, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't. All of these things that we're talking about, I'm not telling you to go and end all of it. But the reality is at some point, like we said last week, you have to say, you know what, I've tried to put up guardrails. I've tried to do things to let this be a good influence to me, and it's not working out. I have to know when to turn around. The last one I thought about was music, all right? I think that's the last one I got. Whoa, I hit my microphone and it was really loud. Sorry. Music can be a negative influence in your life, but it doesn't have to be, all right? Well, and I'm going through the same thing over and over again. Your Spotify playlist can be full of worship music. I actually literally walk into my office every day just about and I say, hey, Google, can you play Maverick City music? She actually might hear me because my office is like right through that wall. And I love listening to worship music. It's a beautiful thing. You can fill your Spotify playlist with good podcasts. We actually have a Redemption Youth podcast now, so feel free to listen to that. You can listen to this talk again. If you're listening to us on the podcast right now, thank you. Please like, subscribe, and share. Yeah, like your Spotify, your Apple Music, your Apple Podcast can actually be really good influences in your life. My plan is tomorrow to start listening to a sermon a day. In the morning, I have about 30 or 45 minutes that I spend with my kids, getting them ready for the day, feeding them breakfast, them yelling at me for random stuff. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start playing my iPad and just let it play a sermon every morning to get 6 different pastors and just listen to one a day. Like, it doesn't have to be negative, but the reality is that oftentimes our social media, the things that we watch, the people we hang around, the things that we are committed to, and the things that we listen to are oftentimes negative influences in our life. And so what we need to do is to figure out, how do we redeem these things? How do we make our social media feed full of encouragement and good theology and holiness instead of full of lust and full of meaningless dance videos? Your watch list for Netflix or Hulu. It can be full of things that will help you, that are good for you to, you know what, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to watch an episode or two. They can be good for you. They don't have to cause you to fall into temptation. Your group of friends, they can push you towards holiness, or they can continue to over and over and over again tempt you into sin. Your sports team can be something to help build discipline and teamwork and those things in your life, or it can continue to be an idol that constantly consumes your mind and consumes everything about you. The things you listen to, they don't have to be negative. They don't have to cause your mind to think about things that you shouldn't think about. They can actually be good. They can actually cause you to worship. They can actually cause you to learn things. So that is my hope, that as we continue to narrow down, what is it that influences me, that we would not be like Judas, under the ability to soak in good things, to soak in godly things. We wouldn't be like Judas, but instead, we would allow these things in our life that can be good to influence us in a good way. Think about my relationship with Sean, all right? Is Sean God? No. Is Sean influenced by God? Yeah. There's a level of disconnect there, that I'm influenced by Sean, and in turn, God is shaping me and creating in me what he wants for me. Your social media, your friends, the things you listen to and watch, and the things that you are committed to can also be that. They can also push you and guide you towards holiness and Christ-likeness. They don't have to be negative influence. So I would hope that you would be able to embrace that, to see that, and to really lean in to the idea of redemptive influence, the idea that you can use the things that you are surrounded with for good. Because the reality is, there will be something in our life that is our primary influence. Far too often, this list influences us far beyond anything with God. What we see and listen to and the people we hang out with, the things that we're committed to, influence us and cause us to make decisions far, far more than our Bible and the things that God has revealed to us through prayer. It's important that as we look to be influencers in the world for Christ, that we allow Him and the things about God to be our primary influence, to be the thing that shapes us and guides us in every action we make, every thought we think. That is our hope. That is our goal as we look to influence people. Hey, listen, I want you guys to circle up and to talk about some of these things, okay? So I'm going to throw a few questions up on the screen. If you guys want to break out to these tables, maybe 7 or 8 people at each table, our leaders will split up as well. And you guys have, about 5 minutes to work through these questions. All right. Hey, I know that wasn't a ton of time for you guys to work through these questions. Go ahead and make your way back to the middle, though, and the band is going to come up. They're going to lead us in some more worship. Hey, listen, I want you to really, as we worship tonight, a few of the songs that we're singing are very reflective on kind of surrendering it to God, to telling God, hey, God, I know that right now there are so many other things in my life that influence me, that shape me and make me do the things I do. But God, I want you to be the thing that influences me. So I want to encourage you, as we worship tonight, I want you to surrender that to Him, to know that the God of the universe, your Creator, wants you, that He wants to influence you, that He wants to be the person and the thing that helps shape your life. Don't be as Judas and betray that and put that to the side. Allow God, through His word, through prayer, through being around other believers, to influence you. So that's my prayer. Let me pray real quick. Lord, help us to be shaped and molded by You. Help us to worship You tonight in spirit and in truth. Speak to us. Help us to be agents of change in our world. In Jesus' name, amen.